Welcome to the Board Game Marketing Podcast. Let's cue the intro. This is the #1 podcast to learn marketing strategies for your board game. Whether you're just starting on your first game or an experienced designer, you've come to the right place. My name is Nalin, and let's talk marketing for your game. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Board Game Marketing Podcast. In this podcast, I interview creators who have successfully funded their ideas on Kickstarter to learn more about their journey to launch and help you formulate your own plan. I also bring on experts in the tabletop space to talk about all the facets of marketing and building your game publishing company. If you've been listening for a while now, you know that I hold nothing back. So in these episodes, be prepared to hear me ask the hard questions and really get down to the finer details. Let's get started. So to kind of start us off, tell us a little bit about, kind of how you got into the tabletop industry. Let's start there because there's a lot to uncover after just getting into it.
Yeah, I've had the good fortune of making games my entire career. Started making video games in college at the University of Michigan, and then started my own company for making Game Boy Advance games, which failed, and then ended up just working through the video game industry. And when I worked in QA, design, production, running studios, but I worked at a company called Mind Control Software, where I met Thomas Denmark. Thomas Denmark is the creator of the Dungeoneer franchise, which is an older one, but he was working on a game called Murder of Crows at the time, and wanted some design support. So we ended up, he did all the art. He's an artist. And so that was really the first thing. And then I really got into the scene and playing. And then a few years later, I designed Liftoff, Get Me Off This Planet, while I was at Blue Fang Games. And, I shipped it off to a couple publishers and just waited. And it had been like a year or two and no one picked it up. And so that was that. And then I locally was in like a local game, what is it called? I don't even remember. It's been so long. Like Game Group, whatever those things are called, right? And a guy there, Aldo, who runs Impressions, which is a consolidator, now Flat River, or was acquired by. We were talking and Emily was like, hey, you should bring Liftoff, because I had a prototype and all that. And we were playing all, normal games. And I did. And he was like, so why aren't you on Kickstarter with this? And I was like, not really what's Kickstarter, but like board games on Kickstarter? Like, really? And he's like, yeah, man, there's, and so I ended up taking it on, it funded, and then just made a whole variety of games. And so since then, have done a lot of games. Also after Liftoff, here's a good marketing thing. Liftoff, I had no presence on BGG. I had no presence on Facebook. I had no presence on Twitter. And sort of like, leading up to that Kickstarter launch, it was like 0 to 60, 0 to 1,000, trying to like get awareness and engagement and participate and get people excited for the campaign. And it was like huge lift the whole way to like, and Liftoff did well, but it didn't like suddenly, it didn't fund day one or anything. Like it really took the full effort to get it across the finish line. And coming out of that, I was sort of like, I never want to do that again. But, at that time, I didn't know when I was going to make a game next, and game development takes a while. So I was like, how can I participate and engage with the community if I don't have games, right? Like, you only have so many game launches, right? And so that's when I was like, well, I feel like there's this opening for relatively short game review content, right? Like a lot of the stuff at that time was really long. So I started doing Edo's game reviews. And then a year later, I was participating with the League of Game Makers. This might be long-winded, I don't know. But I was participating with the League of Game Makers, and they were asking everyone for blog content. And I was like, I have no interest in writing blog content. Sorry. But, like, I can do videos about stuff. And, we're like, okay. So I started doing all of the sort of industry-type videos that I've been doing since then. I mean, this is still, time passes. This is like 4 or 5 years ago, maybe. And so, yeah, that's what I've been doing. So I love games, make games, play games, all of the above.
I love it. It's quite a journey that you've had from video games and like kind of getting into the industry and being like, this Kickstarter thing, let's try it out. And now just being very involved with multiple games. right? How has marketing for you kind of changed ever since you started? Because you were talking about your first game, right? You went to crowdfunding, you didn't have, Board Game Geek presence. There was none of this, right? You were going slowly, getting people to like play the game and like try the game and start kind of drumming interest that way. And now it's kind of a different scene. What kind of differences do you see? What kind of growth or changes for the better or for the worst have you seen?
That's a good and complex question. One of the marketing scenes I've been dealing with and working with in parallel to Kickstarters and board games is just free to play online games, right? So I've been making free to play games for big companies and small companies and mobile games for whatever, longer than board games. So for the last 7, 8, 9 years, Facebook games, right? And so thinking about understanding user acquisition, the funnel, those type of KPIs, how you're, converting, engaging, retaining, that whole vocabulary, that whole thing, like the web and mobile scene has been doing that in spades. So on the more recent side, like probably in the last year or two, that's where I see the more and more board game creators, the Kickstarter market, the board game market growing, where more and more folks that have that kind of web, mobile, online, sort of marketing experience, CPI and all that stuff, right? That has really started to become much more awareness that's happening, and that's relatively recently. And you have companies like GelUp and other things like sort of trying to like, marketing firms. But like for me in engaging in the market, the thing that's been, I think, so engaging and great about the Kickstarter and board game scene, right, is it started as it's very community driven, and it's very sort of social media, brick and mortar or on your, bootstrap type marketing initiatives, guerrilla type marketing initiatives. And there have been lots of fun stories about how that has sort of moved and drawn in users. I think some of that now we're like shifting out of that, right? Because that's sort of an early phase type of marketing. But I really still think that you see a lot of opportunity for that in this space. Prices go up. Markets are more expensive. So if you are looking for places to put your creative, if you're looking to buy, content on a variety of different platforms, sites, that is more expensive. As the creator industry has grown, it also has started charging and becoming more expensive. So, it's definitely a challenging and dive into it. For me, if anything, I probably do less marketing now than I used to. I have found that I've built a large enough sort of base and following, and not like for Gaming with Edo, I mean for the games and Pencil First Games and the variety, the newsletter and the variety of stuff we do sort of as a basic, that I can get over the hurdle of like in many ways. So I'm a boutique publisher, right? Like my games have done well, but they're not like monster games, right? And so in many ways I've been priced out of marketing. Like I don't think there's enough upside for me as a company to spend those dollars. Like those are really expensive dollars because it's just straight spend, that I don't think I get the upside from it. Like, and some easy examples, like there's creative ones, but like BGG newsletter ads. If you're interested, Board Game Geek has like a slew of offerings that cost anywhere from $500 to $2,000, and there's a contest, and like there's a whole spectrum of things you can do with them. I used to do those, and then like I wasn't getting return. I would look at the content, and like there was like a mismatch between like my market and BGG's market or whatever, and it never was like, wow, that was worth it. And as it got more expensive and more complicated, it was just like, this isn't a good place for me to spend my money, or the company's money or whatever. And so I stopped, right? And so that isn't to say it's not good for some people, but so I think for me, it's, I have Anna Maria, who's fantastic, AMJ, on marketing, and Jessica on sales, and retail and distributor relationships. And like, so like I'm now investing more in presence with people as opposed to just spending that money on marketing campaigns.
Yeah.
Whether or not it works, we'll see. But that's sort of the approach I've been taking.
Got it. Yeah, I love that you kind of detailed about that introduction of more data and KPI and analytics into the tabletop industry. And now that people are understanding more about how that data plays into marketing, really taking into account that and adding lots of spend into those different channels where you can look at like cost per lead, cost per acquisition, return on ad spend, things like that, right? And you also kind of talked about kind of evolution from that. There's noise now, right? There's so much noise because it's a booming industry, right? There's a lot of games coming out there, so there's noise. And so you found a way to grow your audience enough to really hone down on who they are and not have to really mess with all that noise in a way.
Right. Yeah. And it is a trick because a trending Reddit post about your Kickstarter is going to drive more traffic than, $1,000 on Facebook ads. Not that $1,000 on Facebook ads isn't going to drive traffic, but like, it's just disproportionate. But like, you also then have to consider like, that isn't always guaranteed. You can't just go into those groups without participating in those groups. There's like a whole mixture of things that you need to be doing all along the way, right? So certainly I think, yeah, Anna Maria is great. She's fantastic.
Great shout out.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, and she's actually been really great. What I have found is I'm getting old. I'm into trends in terms of active social media marketing platforms, how to take each of them on, and they're all different, right? Like what you're going to do on Instagram is different than Facebook, is different than Twitter. If you're trying to build your presence on Pinterest or TikTok, that's different as well. And to some extent, having somebody who's like in it all the time and really engaging with it, I think a great example, just because you mentioned Anna Maria, we had the PFG celebration day, and the idea was like, hey, I was sort of bringing this team of folks together and we wanted to like do something. And like a lot of the big online cons have been like busts for most publishers and were not worth the time. Not all of them, but many of them. And we were like, well, let's do our own little thing. Let's just do it for one day. And like the way I would have done it myself would have been like, I would have reached out to like publishers and other people I know in the industry and done playing games, but it wouldn't have been like what she did. Is she like found all of the active creators and content creators in the space and people with their own channels, and she like brought people in and did all of these streams for all the different games. It was like fantastic, and it was one of those. I'm pretty good at a lot of things, but it's one of those places where I'm like, I would not have done as good a job as that. Like she did a better job than I would have done easy. And so I think finding folks to work with to help navigate the space is important. Not everybody can be good at everything, right? And so finding folks to work with is a big deal.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to bring up too. There's a lot of people think like, how do I do this? But rather sometimes you should think about like, who can help me do this, right? Because like you mentioned, not everyone has that expertise. And sometimes as creators, as entrepreneurs, we get bogged down on the idea of we have to do it. How do I do this? How do I make this happen? But maybe it's, passing on to someone with an expertise.
And actually something really good, a good practice to do, I like to help people think about is like, I think many people are able to say, what would a great execution be, right? Like I think, especially if you're in the space, they have an idea, they're seeing it, they're like, oh, this company did a really good job, or this execution was really good job. Like somebody's oftentimes able to describe what great looks like. And so sometimes it's better to describe what great is and then say, well, if I were going to do great, how would I do it? Could I do it? Do I need to work with somebody else to do it? Is this doing it? Right. And sort of taking it, not thinking about what you're trying to do and not worrying so much about who does it, but just coming up with like, what would theoretically be an execution plan? Like you're like, well, I could theoretically come up with an execution plan if I had $10,000. Okay, well, that's good to know. Can you come up with a way to get $10,000? Like maybe you can't solve the execution, but you can solve the money part. That's just an example. But I do think oftentimes people have taste, they have perspective, they understand what fantastic looks like. They just sort of like get lost in like, well, I can't do it, or find folks to help you.
Yeah, and I think this brings us to another point that you were talking about earlier too, which is kind of building up a publishing company, right? A lot of people think that launching a game, that's it. I've done it. I'm successful, right? But a lot of people don't know that, after the launch, there's a lot of other things that you have to do, not only to market, find your, continue to talk to your audience, but also build up a company, hire the right people, like what you're kind of doing, and working with the right people, what you're doing. What are kind of the things that, what are kind of the things that you had to really kind of learn and work through as you left your initial launch phases into the post-campaign build phases?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think actually the first two videos, so I have a lot of video content that I'll still go back to. Somebody will comment on it or whatever. But it's like the first couple videos I did this like 5 years ago. One was about so you want to make a game, and the other was so you want to run a Kickstarter. But both of them, in a sense, tie to a question which I think is the foundation of what you're saying, which is sort of I ask this to people all the time. It's what do you want to be when you grow up, right? Do you want to be a publisher? Do you just want your game out there? Do you want to be critically acclaimed? Do you want to make money? What are you aspiring to have happen? And I think dialing into that starts helping answer some of those questions, right? Because potentially the answer is you don't need to worry about, potentially the answer is you just want your game in the world. The Kickstarter did that. Whatever. Don't worry about all those other people. Just print what you need. You don't have to print additional copies. Just move on, right? Or no, maybe you want to do all this. I think I had a little bit of a leg up in that, I knew Thomas from Murder of Crows, and so he was sort of, Murder of Crows was published by Atlas Games, but he was somebody who would go and go to conventions, and I live in Mountain View, the Bay Area of California, so DundraCon, PacificCon, KubaCon, those types of West Coast conventions. And he's an artist, so he would often have booths and stuff like that. So he was a good conduit into oh no, you can have a small indie thing, pay $50, go to this place for a weekend and sell 20 copies. You can do that to a certain scale. But the other, leg up, I guess, is that the guy who was you should run a quick Kickstarter was Aldo. And Aldo runs Impressions, and so you can reach out to Impressions or PSI or all these consolidators and have them pick up your titles. And a lot of them do. Some, as those two have been busy, they're now secondary and third ones that have third and fourth ones that have developed. But you find these consolidators, and they're going to take a cut of the money you would get selling to a distributor, selling to retailer. So it's a really shrinking pie. But they can get your games into retail to some degree or another, right? So for me, Aldo, who had sort of participated and sort of elbowed me into doing the Kickstarter in the first place, he wasn't obligated to pick the game up, but I'd sort of be upset if he would. So, I was able to be in distribution. Now, Liftoff did not make a ton of money in distribution. And in fact, that project was underwater, but it just was a matter of getting into the industry, figuring things out, figuring out the next game, the next title, and sort of building on top of it. I found success by making games, right? It wasn't, I was not a marketing genius. I did not have lightning in a bottle. Liftoff was underwater. People liked it, but I had maybe 500, 600 copies that would sell over time. It wasn't that suddenly was enough to run a company or anything. And I'm employed the entire time, right? None of this is I didn't quit my job, and this is all hobby, right? But what happened was I just kept making games, and the next game I did was The Siblings Trouble. That got some renown because it was part of Tabletop Deathmatch, but I think it funded on Kickstarter for 25, 30K. Didn't set the world on fire. Sold some copies. My next title, Gem Pact, had a 10K funding, and it did 12. I mean, it was a brutal closeout to get that over the line, and it didn't set the world on fire. But all of them allowed the cycle to continue again, and I like making games, so it was opportunity to make games. It wasn't until Herbaceous that I had a title that got a reprint. So when eventually I do expanded deluxe edition of Liftoff, but like from the Liftoff didn't have a reprint, Gem Pack Cards doesn't have a reprint, The Siblings Trouble doesn't have a reprint, Legendary Creatures doesn't have a reprint. It wasn't until Herbaceous that I had a title that, it's not quite lightning in a bottle, but mixed those elements together really nicely enough that like it popped. And that was just enough so that it wasn't like literally it was always Kickstarter to Kickstarter. Like, hey, that 10K starting fund goes up and is back at 10K, do the next project goes up and is back, right? And it just sort of is steady. That was the first one where maybe that 10 turned to 15 or, like a little bit more there. But it started turning the wheel a little faster, started building on that. So the marketing, some of the approach I've done as a publisher is I think of my product and product audiences. Like, so a really common problem Kickstarter creators have all the time, and I suffered from this myself, but I see it all the time, is they like make their first game in genre X with theme Y. And then they're like, oh, it did well. It was great. I'm going to make another game, but not for that audience. I'm going to make a game in a different genre with a different mechanic, like my other the other idea I want to do. And then they're like surprised when their audience doesn't pick it up. It's like, yeah, somebody who wants, dungeon crawl combat type game isn't necessarily the same people that want, a party game. And like, you can't even, the fact that you expect your audience to respond to you, just, I think inevitably is that ego hit where it's got to be like, you understand no one buys a game for you. Like your first game, maybe your family buys a game for you, right? Like, or if you're a personality, but like generally they're buying games because they want the game. Maybe you made it and you were, it sort of fits your persona, but really if you show them game A, they dig it, but you show them game B and game B is nothing like what they want, they're not gonna buy it. So there's a lot of flailing that happens for Kickstarter creators is they're trying to be a publisher because they don't have a brand and a name in the retail and distribution market. So they're you can't just like they'll pick up other creators and other designers, and they're like, I just need to keep running Kickstarters. I think the most effective thing for Pencil First Games was me saying, hey, as I stack on more games, how am I building? How am I saying people who like Herbaceous are going to like Sensitive for Water or Herbaceous Sprouts or the Whatnot Cabinet or the upcoming Foliferous, or hey, how I want to take a leap in another direction, like Skull Hollow is the other big title we have. Didn't appeal to that audience. I mean, there are probably some a 2-player asymmetric head-to-head kill each other thing, right? But like with Foxes and Guardian, but it was a pivot into a new audience, right? And so I think it's something to keep in mind as you go, right? Yeah. Like as you're trying to make that step from just I made a game and how do I bring it to market, but I'm actually going to be more of a publisher.
Yeah, so pretty much like literally starting off by thinking about what do you, like what you said, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you actually want to do after launching this game? What is your idea? What is the goal? And your goal is to be a publisher. And so kind of worked backwards and thought about the different audiences that you have to, create games for and to, and building off of each of the previous launches in a way, rather than kind of haphazardly spreading all your eggs in every single basket and not having anything kind of build off of one another in a way.
Yeah, I would even highlight that idea to a small extent as being a little bit of a pitfall to say, if you want to be a publisher, right? Like there's a pretty fun video where the Dice Tower did like 10 things we hate from designers. And I did a response video to that. But one of the topics that came up was designers who are trying to be publishers. And I think part of the distinction is, generally speaking, when you talk about a publisher, a board game publisher, Pencil First Games is a board game publisher, but generally when you're talking about it, you're talking about an entity that is taking a variety of games from, different designers, different look feels, and they're creating a slate and a product catalog, and they're a publishing house. Like I publish these authors, I publish these designers. Most Kickstarter creators, I find, aren't actually trying to do that. There are some, and actually some who do it really well. Chad Elkins from 25th Century Games is amazing at like doing all these. He does all the sorts of random project weird deals that I love. He's like, I saw this guy and he was doing this thing, so I said I could help. All that kind of like opportunistic in a good way things. But I think most Kickstarter creators honestly are saying, I want to make games. I want to make the games I love, and I want to be able to do it in, again and again and again, and set up a business entity that allows me to do that, which is called a publisher. But I think that's really about cultivating your tribe, figuring out how to build a consistent message, thinking about what your product stories are, thinking about what your brand stories are, and looking to connect, than necessarily just saying, how do I? Because like I think most people don't want to become renegade. Like maybe you want to be that big size, but like that's not necessary. That's like it's a totally different thing than making your own game.
So from here, what is your process, right? You talked about cultivating your fans, like building up your crowd. What kind of process do you personally go through that you can share with us all for this?
Process, like say for like building up an audience before Kickstarter, or
kind of mostly kind of your thought process of how to think about who your audience would be, and also how to like, hey, how am I going to brand Pencil First Games, for example? How am I going to brand this game under this bigger umbrella? Just kind of more higher level strategic thinking of how it's all done in a way.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you can talk about the company and talk about the product at the company level. What I've and do is, because I use Pencil First Game, it's still a hobby, but like I use it to, I love, like, what do I like? I like working with different people to make cool, fun stuff. And so Pencil First Games creates an opportunity to work with different designers, different art, different whatever, to make things together. And I'm more interested in making something than necessarily making the most money or the biggest success. An example of that, currently I'm working with Vincent Dutrait on a Hanafuda deck. A Hanafuda deck is this classic Japanese, it's the type of cards, it's like a Japanese style poker deck that Nintendo started making before they made video games, right? And I'm a big fan of it. I lived in Japan. I was a Japanese major in college. Like there's a whole, but I'm super interested. It's a deck it's smaller than a poker deck. It's that big. It's absurdly expensive because the cards are like on hard, like there's like no market. It's like a small, like this game is going to do. I am not expecting this thing to take over the world, but like it's cool, and I wanted to do it, and Vincent wanted to do it, so we're doing it, right? But like when thinking about the company as a whole, what I've tried to do is have a consistent and a clear, brand and identity for the product. So what does that mean? So I would say Pencil First Games is full stack in the sense that our games are Kickstarter and they go to retail. We go out of our way to have high quality communication and execution, starting with the Kickstarter. So I pride myself in Kickstarters that are run well. He's amazing. Well managed, good communication, responsive, delivered on time, and have built on that Kickstarter after Kickstarter, saying, yeah, if you back one of our Kickstarters, we're going to deliver. We're going to treat you well. We're going to listen to your problem. And like most of that is me just doing that. But I do instill it with other folks when Anna Maria or Jessica, whomever, it's like, hey, we're about good relationships with our backers and our partners, right? The next thing I think Pencil First Games are like, they're not all necessarily herbaceous beautiful. They're like different types of beautiful, but like I really love games that have fantastic visual execution and high component quality and sort of the product execution. And so I feel like anyone who buys a Pencil First Games, they might not like every one of them, but anyone who buys it and who has bought a previous one is like, I'm going to get something that a team of people made that is well crafted, well thought through, and intended. And if ultimately I don't like it, I might not, I can't tell you you're going to love Foliferous or the Whatnot cabinet, like, or you liked herbaceous, well, you like herbaceous sprouts. Like, everyone's different. But like, that you spent $20, $25, $40, whatever it is, and like you didn't get a box with broken pieces in it or cardboard, that you're going to get that experience and that level of care and attention to detail. So I think as a company and a brand, those are the kinds of things that we can embody, because that spans all of our products, right? We can say customers are important, partners are important. We can say we care about our quality of our execution. We can do all that and continue to reinforce it. And then look for ways. So I did a video on OKRs, which are objectives and key results, but it's like a framework for thinking about how you want your business to run. And part of that is saying, like, what are some of our business objectives? And maintaining that quality is important. Engaging with the community is important. Growing the not only our audience, but the board game space. So we have objectives that aren't just, none of our objectives are, in fact, make a ton of money. The closest thing to that in our objectives for, say, the next year is help Herbaceous realize its potential. So like Herbaceous is still a title that's pretty much indie, but like we believe it's a title that, you know, could be as big as any other sort of casual all audience games, and so that's something we're continuing to invest in. In regards to a product, I think it's really important. Everyone should go through the exercise of thinking about who they're making their game for. Like, what's their audience? It might, a lot of people, it's them, but like go a little bit further than that, right? Like what, and that, because it seems like a demographic conversation or this conversation, some easy ways to start in the board game space is like, hey, what other games would somebody like? Then they'll also like my game, right? Like I'm doing a dungeon crawl, or I'm doing a Euro, or I'm doing this. And you're like, well, if you like Tori, the 100 Tori is a great example by Scott Caputo. It's sort of like, if you like Carcassonne, you probably like the 100 Tori. If you like this, you probably like this. Now, what is that doing? Well, it's helping you sort of establish where your product is. And there's a lot of interesting things that come out of that, which tie directly to marketing. One is, well, if you've identified likes and interests of folks that you think are high affinity to your product, you could market to them very easily on Facebook and otherwise. So you're like, oh, I'm going to go find the places where there are a bunch of people who like, you know, solo games, or who like, you know, again, Euro or Carcassonne fan bases. And like, I'll start showing them our game because I think it'll match with them. Another thing though, is starting to understand like price points and quality bars. And if you say like, again, with the 100 Tori to Carcassonne example, somebody who buys this should buy this and love it. And this game's a huge hit, so this is a really strong affinity. Well, if I price Tori 3 times more expensive, then they probably won't buy it, because a person likes a game, but they also have a price point and they have, you know, how much a budget for spending on games. And so I think that's a more natural way for people to start diving into it. I tend to, when I think of games, I tend to think about it as sort of, for pencil first games, a couple markets, I guess, for us. One market is super broad. I can play this with my kids and the grandparents, right? And that is like all ages, really accessible. You know, that's where Herbaceous is. That's where Sunset Over Water is. That's where Foliferous is. And I go out of my way to think about that audience. A really interesting example of that is for Foliferous. Okay, let's back up. Herbaceous has a solo mode. Keith Mateka did it. Thunderworks Gaming, role player, great designer. And he's done a number of our solo modes. One of the things you'll hear from board game solo gamers, people who are really into that space, is they want Automa. Not Automa, but they don't like, there's a strong message. We don't want beat score solo play. We want solo play where there's interaction and engagement and playing versus other players and like more elaborate, more contrived solo play. And Herbaceous is a beat a score solo play. It's really smooth. It's super slick, but it's beat a score. And also not just like you win or lose type of like succeed or fail. And we were coming on Foliferous, and, you know, before Keith dives in, we always talk about this stuff. And, you know, he was bringing up some of that feedback. And, you know, what I said to him was, because I didn't want to go in that direction. What I said to him was like, look, this is a game, Foliferous is literally a game I want a grandparent to play on Sunday, while if they're going to play solo while like drinking a cup of tea, right? And this player plays solitaire. This player plays plays bridge. This player this person is not diving in and wanting to set up another player and play multiple pawns at the same time and be doing all this stuff and have this is like creating the opportunity for somebody who maybe is alone, who doesn't have people to play with. I want the broad definition of solo, not the gamer definition of it, for lack of a better term, not the solo player definition of it. And so I pushed on, no, like, I don't mind if it's beat a score or survive, like something straightforward, like solitaire, you either win or you lose, right? Like if you play solitaire, you're like, oh, I busted, I'm going to just play it again. I wanted to appeal to that audience because that's what the product audience is. And so, and Keith is great. So he's like, yeah, okay. And, I think he did this pesky guess. It's not just beat the score. There's a crow that's harassing you. So it's got some thematic fun, but it's not, I didn't need to, I know that Keith can do that. Like Keith can make a design that he does it all the time in his other games, right? But it's sort of like, that's not what this game is about. And it comes through in thinking about your UI, your presentation. So it's really important. But so there's that all age ones. I think about family games, which is like more like with your kids, which have like punched up color, a little bit more going on. And then more of like what I would think of as more your traditional board gamer, heavier play, more complexity or maybe more excitement. The 100 Tory is an example of a game which I think works for players who have played a few games. But I could give herbaceous to anybody. I was like, here's this game, you're going to play it. You pick a card, decide to keep it or put it in the middle, and then you do the opposite. Like bird in the hand is worth two in a bush. You're just going to play that game. Like that's really easy. Tory is like a game, like a board game, and you got to be one level up. So like you'd graduate into that. And so that's sort of how I think about it. But different people have different markets.
Yeah. And it all, again, comes back to just that idea of an audience that you kind of started off with too. Like a lot of people forget to do that exercise, like you mentioned, of really honing in on who their audience is, who would like this game, what other games do they like, what kind of activities do they do, do they appreciate about games themselves. That's really great examples that you bring up about how you approach that audience for your games under Pencil First Games.
And that, once you've established that, it informs everything. It informs how you design your box. It informs how you, what kind of ads you're running. It informs what type of groups okay, let's go back to that Hanafuda example. Okay. There's three audiences for Hanafuda that we're going for. It's going to be gorgeous. So one is people who love Vincent Dutrait's art. It's just this Facebook user, but whoever said, I love Vincent Dutrait's art. So you're one person, you're one group of people that is just that one. That's you're my target audience A. Target audience B are people who like Hanafuda. These are folks who know the game, know how to play, and like buy Hanafuda decks. They're already buying Hanafuda decks. The third audience is Pencil First Games fans who know our products and my taste and our taste and say, if Ed is putting this out there, we've seen enough things and, let's take a look. Like I'll always check out the page and my newsletter is going to hit you. And so it's easy to hit that Pencil First Games audience. I do that every time. It's easy to hit Vincent's audience because it's the board game space and he also can hit it and help. The space that is not easy to hit is the Hanafuda audience. I know nothing. I mean, I'm a part of it, but like, I'm not sitting there like hanging out in Facebook groups or Reddit pages or wherever like that group of people hang out. And so one of the things that, I've mentioned to Anna Maria, and as we do a lot of research in the product. We do a lot of research on the product. And so when you're like looking up details, you bump into somebody's blog who does Hanafuda blogs, or you bump into something. And so I've asked her to start building a list of like, what are all of the Hanafuda Facebook groups and what are all the Hanafuda this? So when we come out, I know those are the three audiences I want to hit. And the ones that are easy, we're just going to hit easy. But the other one is going to be like, hey, and maybe how can I hit that audience? Finding out where they are. Maybe, we've done all of this research on Hanafuda and all the art and we interpreted it. So like maybe we write an article about it. Maybe we try to get something posted in a Japanese newspaper. Maybe I think about, normally my pricing to Japan sort of sucks, but maybe I have a partnership with a publisher in Japan so that I can have more reasonable pricing, because I know that's an audience that we're going to have variety of Asian countries buy Hanafuda decks like they buy poker decks, right? So how in Korea, Hawaii is another big audience for it. So like, how am I going to address those markets? But that's only relevant to Hanafuda. Like that's that game. I don't worry about that with Foliferous. Foliferous is more like, how do we make it hit the herbaceous audience? Okay, it's the same box size. It's the same price point. We took a name that's, similar but different and fun. We said this game, we see this so much as like the spiritual sequel. The box is framed in the same way. So if you sit both boxes next to each other, they resonate the same way. So like that's in the Floriferous is a fantastic game for somebody who likes herbaceous. See, look, we're trying to knock on those things, and you'll see advertisements for them together from the team that made herbaceous, things like that, to continue to reinforce and drive at that market, because there's the Pencil First Games market, there's the beautiful art market, and then there's the people who love herbaceous market, right? And we definitely want to also be looking at that.
Yeah, those are really, really great examples and great points that you bring up for each of those games, right? And the different markets and how you're kind of approaching kind of channel distribution, pricing for each of them, just by knowing your audience and doing that exercise of just really understanding like 3 core audience groups for yourself. So earlier you mentioned that, at the price point of some of the games that Pencil First Games has, right, advertising might not be the best channel for marketing, right? From here, what do you do? Like, what are kind of the next steps? How do you approach getting the word out and getting attention for games if you can't just throw money at the problem?
It's a great question. If and when we are back to conventions and cons and all those things, I think those are really effective opportunities to do that. They're good for networking. They're good for players playing. Usually, you have to pay for your price of admission, but you can set up play test tables. We've participated in First Exposure Play Hall a number of times, which is really good at Gen Con. Again, these things, I don't know how much they exist, but I think what's his name? I always forget his name, and the name is Baked Apple Beer Games. I don't remember the guy's name. I forget his name. But he had a game like Truckin' the USA or whatever. He did a road trip through game stores. He drove all around. He spent his summer just going to game stores and showing off his game. And when it comes to like the amount of people, like most games that aren't like Bloodstone or like crazy, like those types of things, you don't need 20,000 people. You're really only talking about 500, 600, 800 type backers to get going. And you can actually meet those people. You can actually, again, it's hard right now, but you can do that. So definitely like just putting in the legwork, I think helps. I think, again, looking at understanding the different community groups is important. Engaging them in participating. Again, if you don't have time to participate, but you have somebody else who can participate well for you, that counts. I think with Facebook ads to maybe sign up for a game in the future, I think that's a very I think you can do a lot of that by hand though, right? Showing off the game, playing it on Tabletop Simulator and saying, hey, we just played. If I get your information, I can let you know when it comes out. Especially if you like indicate or suggest you've taken their feedback, people are going to be interested in, right? You can get, if you give yourself 6 months to do it, you can get 1,000 names that way. And then the people who played it, engaged it, I think that's important. Being in relative areas. Oh, a fun thing that I suggest, you go through a process of making a game. Especially this happens to your first one. You've been working. And then you're like 2 months out and you're like, I want to show this stuff off. Most people start showing stuff off like as if from where they are, but like no one knows what time has passed. So you don't start showing your latest stuff. Go back in time and be like, start with your sketches. Hey, here's sketches for my upcoming game idea. I don't care that you have final art already. Go back and grab that old stuff and start using it. One, because it'll quadruple your content available to you, but also by skipping all that and just realizing you need it now and starting now, you rob what is the typical opportunity for sharing and engagement in these communities, which is the time in which it's them sort of giving feedback and being aware and seeing it. It's much more interesting to support somebody where you see some of the steps they've gone through than somebody who appears out of the blue. So even if you didn't think about it 8 months ago, you probably have the content there. You don't want to mislead people, but you don't always have to show your latest. You can create that narrative. I think understanding your narrative as a creator is important. I mean, I'm sort of all over the place, but especially if it's your first time, that is still like a first time creator. Why should we support you type of thing? Core Quest is a great example of an incredible narrative where the narrative grabbed everybody. The art, like there's plenty of things when you look at that where it's not as AAA as everything else, but the narrative grabbed people.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really kind of great pieces of advice, right? To really kind of focus on kind of making those relationships, form those relationships, rather than just thinking about, hey, how much money can I spend to grab attention for my game, right? Looking into relationships as the first kind of thing to do too, and building up on that so you know your audience inside and out in a way.
Right. Yeah, and I think involving other people can be helpful. Some people have extended networks. I think the other thing, this is all like when you don't have money or you don't have, when you're just trying to do it on your own. And the only thing maybe you have is time, personal time. But like creating opportunities for participation and support is great, right? Like creating opportunities for content creators or, everyone's looking for content, right? And so, some folks are paid, some folks aren't, but like, you can ask somebody, hey, do you want to show off this game? Which I'm sure, it's fine. But like, think of it like, hey, do you want to be the first person who gets to show this game off? Like, I haven't actually shown it off. Do you want to have, the exclusive? It's not that it's that exclusive, but they get to put it on their video. Like they get to, like, it adds some value there. And then they become a little bit more invested. And so I think just thinking about ways to sort of create a little bit more of a conversation out of it. Like Liftoff, one of the things that we did was we had these cute meeples, and I was at Gen Con, and somebody had mentioned it, and we did a Gen Con Amazon card giveaway thing where basically all you had to do was take a picture of this meeple anywhere and submit it on Twitter. I think if you look up Gen Con Liftoff or Liftoff Gen Con, it's still like the hashtag exists, and you can see all of these little meeples and just people sharing. And then it's at Gen Con, so people were putting it next to all these other games. They were doing all this fun stuff, and it had a lot of viral attention and actually helped us get over the hump from a funding perspective. I think from an awareness standpoint. But I mean, like, I don't do as much now, but back in the day, I just do anything. I think being willing to try and do silly things, stupid things, fun things, weird things. I was doing the Liftoff game and I think Aldo was like, hey, you know what? You should do a stop motion graphic of a stop motion video of the little characters. And like, I've never done a stop motion thing, but I was like, all right. And I spent like an absurd amount of time learning how and trying to do it a stop motion. And if you see the Liftoff Kickstarter, or even the new one, I used it again. I made a like little 30-second aliens running around a board stop motion fun thing. And it came out really well. But I mean, you just have to be like, yeah, well, let's try it. Let's try it. Okay, cool. Be on this video. Okay, cool. Let's do this. Okay, cool. I think this is so this, you would say this differently to different audiences. There is a huge wave of folks who are very adamant about getting paid for their time, not being, not being sold exposure, like people work hard, they should be compensated. And I support that, and I agree with that. And I really do think if something takes a person time, they should be compensated. Like, I think it's like pretty basic to me. Having said that, my personal perspective is like everything I've accomplished in my entire career and all the good opportunities that have ever come from me personally have been when I've been willing to do something for the sake of helping somebody out or doing it or learning or trying something new and gaining. And so there's a balance there. But like what I'm trying to say is if you're the Kickstarter creator, not if you're the content creator, but if you're the Kickstarter creator, you should be willing to do anything. Like you should be willing to spend your time to support other channels, to do this, to do that, to like just not you have to be willing to get dirty, you have to be willing to spend time. Hey, help us out over here. And like I've done so many times where I've bartered my time and expertise in one field for another. I told the story a long time ago for the siblings trouble. It was in this place where for many reasons I had no way to get the art whatsoever. And I was like just super depressed. And then finally I was talking to like literally an international art outsourcer, like somebody who just professionally like does art outsourcing for companies. And I had worked with them in the past, and they were like talking to me about like they were trying to do a mobile game, they were trying to make a game and they didn't know how to do it. And I was like, hey, well, look, how about this? How about I help you with that? I'll like I'll train your product manager, and I'll like give him good advice and teach him how to be a producer. Like I'll and you just do these 200 pieces of art for me, and like we'll call it even. And we worked out all the details, but like being willing to help other people does create opportunities where they end up helping you. And so again, I think it's an interesting balance between that and feeling like you're taken advantage of. Like no one should feel taken advantage of on either side of it. But I just would emphasize that the more often two examples of this. For all my initial campaigns, whenever anybody backed, I messaged them directly with a personal message saying, hey, thanks for backing. I appreciate it. Your name, hope you like it in Cincinnati or something, right? And you can automate this. I know Nalin can come and tell you exactly how to do all that. But like, I can't tell you how many of those people turned out to be people who are like, oh yeah, oh, and by the way, I have this channel. Or by the way, I run events at Gen Con. Or by the way, I do this. Oh, cool. And like it initiated a conversation. So like that was a super valuable to strangers that created this space. I also always felt like for me, doing the Gaming with Edo YouTube channel, which I don't charge for, the Q&As and all that have introduced me to other people and started conversations. And you're not coming in because you want something or you're trying to give them your game. You're just engaging with the community, lets me, if I'm in a bind, I'm not asking for work, but when I'm in a bind and I don't know what to do, I have these resources where, hey, I interviewed that person who did international localization deals. Like, hey, man, we don't remember that time we had that conversation. I have a similar problem. Can we chat about it for half an hour and like have a call and then like get the answer to the question or some advice? So I definitely feel being open with my own. I think that's an offer.
Oh, we lost you for like that last sentence there. Being open,
just being willing to help. Okay. Yeah, being open to help out with other people.
Love it. And I know we're getting close to the end of our conversation here. I wanted to ask you about a little bit more about Fliferous, right? What is this game? When is it coming to market?
Yeah, actually, I should have. It's a long story, but I obviously don't have the box of games behind me right now. Fliferous is a new game. It's coming to Kickstarter on March 23rd. It'll launch at 6 a.m. PST because I have to do it that early. But it's designed by Steve Finn, who's a fantastic designer, Dr. Finn's Games, but he did Herbaceous and Sensitive Water, and a bunch of also those other pencil first games. Keith Mateko's back on solo, as I mentioned. We actually are working with Clementine Campardu, who is this amazing watercolor artist, and she actually did it all on paper, did all the flower art, and it's incredible, and it's very much in that line. If you're looking for a light, breezy, relaxing, fun game with like plays in 20 minutes, but has really interesting decisions, and you feel compelled as you go around the table, like all of that you find in Herbaceous, you find in Sensitive Water. I think Flifer is a fantastic game to check out. You can look it up on BGG. You can go to the Pencil First Games community group, and there's tons of posts there. Or I think if you just go to pencilfirstgames.com, you can click on Fliferous and go get Kickstarter link to back it. But super excited, and it's just what day is it today? It is the
17th.
17th. So like just over a month away, 5 weeks away.
Love it. And I've also linked it in the message comments section of this video too, for anyone who's watching right now. Well, again, really appreciate your time and you sharing. Someone said here, good advice being handed out today. I completely agree. This was really wonderful. I learned a ton of stuff. So thank you so much for your time and for being on with us today.
Absolutely. And I would just say, like, in this channel, in this group, or otherwise, like, anyone's welcome to ask questions, right? Like, I think this community is great because people are willing to help each other be as successful as possible. And I certainly subscribe to that.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you so much for your time, and I will see everyone later. And that wraps up our episode today. If you found what we talked about today helpful in any way, please be sure to leave a review to help others find this podcast. And most importantly, if you're feeling that fire and you're ready to get started on your Kickstarter campaign, be sure to head to the show notes of the podcast. I've linked some of my resources that others have used to successfully launch and get funded. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Board Game Marketing Podcast. For daily tips and advice, find us in the Board Game Marketing group on Facebook. See you next week.